Okay, this is the next installment of Extending Health Span, going into a little bit about how diets are very difficult with restricting the calories, how calorically restricting calories backfires. So a little bit of the anatomy and the physiology of how hunger and satiety work. So the topics, we're going to start with diet or starvation, how it's met with a couple different options of either food-seeking behavior or your metabolism drops if that doesn't work. And then set point, why losing weight is tough and how the body has a tendency to maintain its highest fat mass, which means that if you gain weight and hold that weight for a certain period of time, your body will keep attempting to find that highest weight point. So how do you feel on a calorically restricted diet program, or you've missed a meal? Do you feel hangry? Do you feel tired, or both? So basically, hangry and tired are two lines of defense that protect you from starvation. Starvation is the most, the most imminent mode of death for an organism. So it puts you into this mode of hangry or this food-seeking behavior, or you feel tired. And this is the second line of defense where the body drops its metabolism so that you aren't expending any calories. So the first line of defense, you're hungry, and you feel hungry all day long on a calorically restricted diet. So it looks like this, where you're on that every 3 hours. The ghrelin is expressed from the stomach that's not completely full. And then the leptin, PYY, GLP-1, insulin are lower. So there's this discrepancy between the hunger hormone and your satiety hormones. So your second line of defense is fatigue, where your metabolism slows down and you're less inclined to use your energy stores. And that has this mechanism through the hypothalamus, which is located just below the thalamus. It's sending signals to the pituitary gland, and that decreased stimulation drops the metabolism by slowing the stimulation of the thyroid gland, releasing the hormones T3 and T4 that keep up your metabolism. So reducing caloric intake is like a self-induced hypothyroidism. So basically, this is your body's way. If the hormonal changes don't make you start eating with the ghrelin, making you hungry and food seek, the body takes its second line of defense, drops your metabolism so you can't lose energy. And this puts you on this yo-yo dieting cycle, which every cycle of dieting, you recreate a new set point. And your body says, you've done it to me once, I'm not going to let you do it again. And it starts holding on to every calorie. And that creates this cycle of the before, the after, and then the after. They've done a study looking at health risks for these dieting programs, the yo-yo dieting. This was published not too long ago, 3 years ago, Journal of Diet and Nutrition, showing that dieting is associated with an early death, the yo-yo dieting. They looked at 3,600, roughly, men and women, pretty wide range of ages. They followed them over a 14-year period checking weight, BMI, and their self-reported questionnaires. And then they looked at the people whose weight fluctuated the most, saw that their death rate was 9.4% over that 14-year period. And those whose weight fluctuated the least, the death rate was nearly half, 4.9%. And the authors concluded that yo-yo dieting is associated with an early death. So let's look at this study. Their study over time and their outcome assessed. What kind of research is this? Randomized controlled trial or a case control study? I'm going to put case control study. And this is a situation where they were looking back. So that's retrospective. They're seeing when they died and they look back to see what they did. There's a lot of variables that aren't considered. You need a large number to be considered a robust study, but still an observational study, still interesting. So let's go on to scientific methods, developing and answering this research question. This study, the Minnesota Starvation Study, was a very interesting study. It was back in the 1940s during World War II, and they were wondering what the effects of starvation were on the human body. They initially took like 200 guys that they weeded out 36, all volunteers. They all had the same mental health and physical health. And then their plan was to starve them or semi-starve them. So by reducing their caloric intake by 50%, drop their fat mass, and then observe their physical changes. The PICO is what is used to frame a research question. They have patient population, intervention, comparative intervention, and an outcome. So did they use PICO? The answer is yes. They had the patient or problem. They wanted to see their effects of starvation. The intervention was a caloric restricted program. They had before and after observations, and they had an outcomes they were going to follow. Another question, would you consider this study ethical? In other words, would it pass an IRB if designed today? Answer is actually no. That's why everybody goes back to look at this study, because the results are so interesting and it's one that couldn't be repeated today. So an IRB stands for an Institutional Review Board, and it began in 1974 to ensure that ethical issues were managed, patients weren't being taken advantage of. And they had these three categories: a scientist, non-scientists, and ensuring that some of the people within the board were not affiliated with the institution. So back to the study, the whole basis was to understand the effects of starvation on humans so they could manage the starvation victims after World War II. So again, 36 of more than 200 people were chosen, and they had this strict personality criteria. And this is really important to note that at the beginning of the study, these were really good guys. They worked well in teams. They were all real gizmos. So they're randomized. What was their study design? Random, or was this a cohort study? And the answer, it's a cohort study, because they're taking them and they're looking forward. So they're taking a group of guys, they're looking at the effects over time. So during the starvation time, they looked at their physical effects and they saw that they had significant decrease in strength, stamina, body temperature fell, heart rate went up actually, sex drive went down, metabolism dropped by 40%. That's the hypothalamus kicking in and dropping their energy expenditures. They had hair loss, GI complaints, and headaches. On the psychological side, they lost that gizmo approach. All they did is dream and fantasize about food. They became hysterical at points, hypochondriacal, meaning they were believing they were sick, and they became very depressed. And another things, during the refeeding phase where they started to repeat these guys, they had significant more depression, even during the starvation phase. And this is a quote, a 1950s quote from the researchers. The only time these participants showed positive emotional reactions were in response to discussing their weight, food, or hunger. So basically, they became obsessed with food. So they all became gremlins. The other thing that happened during this refeeding phase is they started overeating. Even though they were warned about overeating, they became engaged in extreme overeating. And when they regained their weight, their fat mass reached more than their original fat mass. So they overshot from 100 to, they went over to 145% of their pre-starvation values. So this gets into set point, the weight at which you don't feel hungry all the time. So there's a lot of factors that cause the set point to rise. And this is a typical example of people, their lifestyle choices, their challenges over time, lots of stress now. All of these things have an effect on slowly increasing the weight from their 20s, maybe 190 pounds, to maybe they get into their 50s and they're up to 350 pounds. Factors that raise that set point are the sleep deprivation, processed foods, inactivity, stress, eating late at night, and certain medications that increase the deposition of fat. So you've seen this image before. So you hold on to your excess fat mass. So every time you gain weight, it creates a new set point. So in contrast, there are factors that lower the set point. So getting quality sleep drops it, non-processed foods, moderate exercise, stress reduction techniques, a fasting schedule, and then supplements and vitamins. So the factors that try to drive the highest fat mass, the hypothalamus, remember, decreases thyroid stimulating hormone and ghrelin. So these are incredibly powerful drivers to maintain that highest fat mass. So is there another body component that has a set point? Does your muscle, bone, or water of the other body components have a set point? The answer is none. It's just fat mass. So you have 4 components that make up body, that make your total body weight: water, muscle, bone, and fat. So bone specifically is affected by gravitational forces on it. So osteoporosis develops for people as they age with less activity less demands on the bones. Muscle is dependent upon testosterone levels as well as the physical demands. And then water, it's maintained through homeostasis. And that's a very close scale where it wants to keep you right in the middle, where intake equals losses. So in contrast, adipose tissue is that point at which you keep holding on to the adipose tissue as your energy stores. So it's the only component of the body that has a set point. And interesting, I want to point out that if you go in and have a lipectomy or transplantation of adipose tissue, your body will try to compensate and get back to your original fat mass. So a liposuction, calorically restricted dieting programs actually don't help in the long run unless you change these factors that affect the set point. The body will do its best to try to replenish those lost adipose stores. So in summary, we talked about being hangry and tired with starvation, and then the lifestyle factors that it can either raise or lower the set point. So remember, water tries to keep things the same. Muscle and bone increase or decrease with bodily demands. And fat mass is where the body wants to keep the highest fat mass in order to prevent starvation. So calorically restricted diet, in summary, just results in frustration. Your hypothalamus gets a signal that you're in a famine. The body becomes very efficient in dropping the metabolism, releasing ghrelin. And then you end up with a feeling of failure and feeling hungry all the time. So I went through and just put some things, actually this is a Weight Watchers program I did to monitor weight over a period of time. And these are the episodes when I was traveling in Uganda and also in South Sudan, where I ended up in a starvation mode, not only because of lack of food, but also illness. Notice how the weight starts to shoot up. I'm trying my best. Before the weight gets way up, I end up going to South Sudan and end up having acute stress, starvation. Weight pops up again. And at this point, right at that level, is where I started all the lifestyle interventions of more sleep, less stress, meditation, all the factors, better food, and getting down to a consistent resetting of the set point through these lifestyle changes. So going from a weight of 155 down to a weight of 134 and still keeping that consistent for nearly 3 years. So in conclusion, optimal weight improves health and longevity. Calorie or calorically restricted dieting is not the way to achieve optimum weight. And multiple lifestyle changes are necessary to achieve extended health span. So my takeaway, it's better to use that multimodal approach to drop your set point. And my other takeaway would be to avoid anyone on a starvation or a calorically restricted diet. So our future lectures, we're going to talk about the mechanisms of how these lifestyle factors work. So we're going to look at the most recent research that looks in the physiology of how, specifically, how these work, these drivers. And then also we're going to go on to talk about some of the medical options for surgical treatment for the morbidly obese and medications. And we'll look at the physiology of how those work as well.